Up next is today's second panel discussion, which will focus on the topic, persisting with progress on diversity and inclusion, even during a downturn. In the past, challenging times in business brought setbacks to diversity and inclusion. Traditional methods for cutbacks like last in, first out approaches and layoffs tended to disfavor marginalized employees. What new methods and insights then can companies embrace to make sure that doesn't happen as business navigates a challenging 2023? As our interviewer for this session, From Day One is delighted to welcome Spencer Whitney. Spencer is currently digital editor for KQED News, an NPR member station in San Francisco. Previously, he worked as multimedia editor at the Oakland Post and as an assistant editor at the San Francisco Chronicle. He earned his undergraduate degree from Howard University and a master's degree from UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. Spencer, we're glad to have you here moderating this exciting panel. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Steve. And hello, everyone. I'm happy to be speaking with you all today. How you guys doing? I think everyone's still on mute. Great. We'll get right to it. The first question I have in regards to this panel is, what are some new methods being used by companies to make sure that marginalized employees aren't being disfavored by layoffs? And we can start with Ari.
I think, when we're looking at any sort of employee action, certainly we're running a analysis to make sure there's no disparate activity that's going on. We're looking at the impacts that it's going to have to our overall employment force. But more importantly, I think anytime that there's an impact to any of our business functions, we're looking at what opportunities we have for mobilization of those employees rather than departure of the employees. And so we really try to find complementary skill sets within the different functions so that we can find new homes for those employees and give them that support if their current role is being eliminated. So we tend to try to stray away from, getting towards layoffs and look for, opportunities for internal mobility as a first step for us rather than offboarding of employees.
Excellent.
Likewise, I think at State Street, we're leveraging what we call a talent marketplace as a hub for redeploying talent. Once we've identified a group of individuals that perhaps those jobs are changing, going away, digitizing, whatever the case might be, we still have a number of open opportunities where we know that there's transferable talent. And so one of the ways in which we are sort of ensuring that, diverse communities, marginalized communities are not impacted as greatly as others is, obviously taking a look at the data and making sure that there are no discrepancies there, but more importantly, what are the opportunities that we can create to reskill, retool, and redeploy those employees?
Would anyone else like to chime in for that one, or I can move on to the next one? Okay. Well, my next question will actually be for Paul. Paul, how do you set yourself up for success, particularly during economic downturn?
Well, so I think in this work, the way that you set up yourself for success, it's a number of different things. The first thing I think, though, is ensuring that you have inclusive leadership, right? That you have managers that understand the value of this work, the value of this workforce, and when we look at this workforce, looking at it from a asset-based type of view versus a deficit-based type of view. And what I mean by that is, a lot of organizations, when it comes to this work, look at this work as a nice to have and a nice to do. So when times get tough and rough, these are the first type of programs that tend to be devalued, that tend to be reduced. But when you are an organization that looks at this as an asset base and as both, a nice thing to do and a business imperative, I think that you have a different approach, right? We spend a lot of time, energy, and resources in trying to bring this type of workforce into our space, or bring these type of programs. And progress is often endangered by some decisions you make when you don't look at this in the same way of light as if you were to look at some of your business challenges. And so when things get tough, you don't say we're going to get rid of finance, or we're going to get rid of IT, So in the same way, we need to look at this work as saying it's critical to our business, it's critical to our sustainability, and it's critical to our competitiveness. If anything, we need to lean in to make sure that we're getting the best, the brightest, right, the most diverse workforce, and therefore, we need to look at the work from a completely different perspective than we have in the past. And I think that companies that do this really well are the ones that will be around for longer, will become, employers of choice, will be set up to have better solutions, better products, and people willing to sort of say, you know what, I'm going to look at that organization because I actually feel that I can be successful there regardless of what the economy is doing, right? We know that these type of programs oftentimes actually put us in a better competitive advantage than our peers and our competitors, and therefore that's the way to look at this work and to look at what happens as a result of this work. And the one thing I was looking at earlier is, when you think about what typically we think as I would say underrepresented communities, we fail to think about their the purchasing power, right? For those of us, whether we are in a B2B or a B2C environment, the reality is that these communities have huge potential, huge purchasing power. You talk about $1.6 trillion in the Black community. You talk about $1.9 trillion in the Latinx community. You talk about anywhere from $5 to $15 trillion in the women purchasing power, right, in that market. And so when you tend to alienate those potential customers, when you tend to alienate and not pay attention to those communities, your business is at peril, right? And I don't care what kind of business you're in, if you're not paying attention to those numbers and how you're interfacing with those communities, then your sustainability might be at in peril and questionable.
It definitely makes sense.
I think to sort of double down on what Paul was saying, I think that when you're in an organization that looks at diversity, equity, and inclusion not as an HR strategy or a people strategy, but as a business strategy, when you're in that position of economic downturn, it really is the time to double down on that business strategy. And so, corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those have become table stakes and expectations from consumers in the marketplace, from a brand perception standpoint. And so being able to go to market, from a revenue generation perspective, from a business perspective, and being able to do so with that brand, that brand perception of a company that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that supports social responsibility, that supports their communities, that puts you at the forefront. I can harken back to a conversation that Paul and I were having previously, and he brought up an example, of a large deal that his organization was able to close simply because the potential client noted that they were so impressed with the DEI strategy that the company evoked. And, Paul, I think you joked that, your CEO said they should be paying you more now that you're bringing in business with your strategy. But that's exactly it. And I think there's real power there. And if you can get your business leaders to understand that power and understand the impact that it has on their business, not just from a people perspective, not just from a altruistic perspective or doing the right thing, but from a dollars and cents perspective, it tends to move it from that, well, it's a disposable piece of a strategy, or it's a COE that's a nice to have but not a need, to an imperative part of your business strategy.
Oh, that definitely makes sense. I want to hear from Rebecca and Mona. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Rebecca, go ahead.
For sure. I think, you've said all of the things that have already gone through my head, right? When the market is good, you should be doing DEIB well. And when the market is bad, you should be doing it really, really well. So when you think about, if you don't show up in the times when it's good, you're going to start losing folks, as soon as the market starts to recover. So I think it's really important that it is embedded in your business strategy as the right thing to do, rather than just using it as a virtuous side hustle.
I can only underscore that as an educator, a professor at an engineering school. I would just hope that this happens, as I send my students out into the workforce, into the world, and want to ensure that they thrive, especially folks from disadvantaged communities, and can deploy their skills to the best of their ability. And one of the things that we can do as educators is extending extra care and nurturing and training, especially in what we would call transferable skills for those folks. And sometimes that just really means that we as professors take extra care and take on extra mentorship, service work to make sure that these students who become candidates, have these kind of skills and also kind of have trust and knowledge that they enter a workplace that supports them throughout.
It's so important to have a workplace that, kind of shares your values, or sharing the values with the workplace and being able to move forward with that. Rebecca, I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with managing DI work when there's competing priorities in business?
Yeah, well, great question, right? There's always competing priorities. So you have to find ways to integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice into all areas of your company. And it needs to be organic. So for instance, inside of Eightfold, our DEIB council, which I'm a part of, it's all employee led. And we have a lot of different perspectives, which allows us to use our experiences to connect with our employees in different ways. For instance, we are an international company that is predominantly virtual. So we do a virtual all-company meeting every week to keep everyone on top of the things that are going on in the organization. We introduce new hires, we see product demos, we get marketing updates, share on topics that are important to our employees. We've got employee resource groups as well, and they also will do presentations to our entire organization. So we've seen presentations from our employees on what it's like to work with neurodivergencies inside our org. What does pride mean to folks? Living with disabilities, how are different holidays celebrated for other folks? It's education, but it also shows that it's embedded into the core of our organization. It also gives us a glimpse into the lives of others. And it also, I think, makes us more empathetic and connected at the same time. Another thing that we do is we customize our holidays and our days off based on where our employees are in the world. So our US office, for instance, will have Veterans Day off, while our office in Germany is off for German Unity Day, and the UK Ireland office is out for their summer bank holiday. So there are little things that you can do continually to help people feel included and part of the team, regardless of where you're located or if you're in person or not.
Well, it's good that you guys are focusing on, like more specific holidays and kind of tailoring it to your employees. So, you have that inclusivity there, because it seems like you would get a lot more buy-in from employees because they're, they can see that the company cares and, just following up with that. So I had a question for Ari. What are some ways that you see companies are expanding their pipeline to find diverse candidates?
Yeah, so I think certainly, whether it's a focus on diversity or just a focus on getting the best talent in general, I think opening the profiles and looking at non-traditional profiles for candidates is a key element. So if you're thinking sort of legacy practices and looking for the same experience and the same, graduate degrees and the same backgrounds over and over and over again, one, you're not going to give yourself the opportunity for any kind of diversity, whether that be diversity of ethnicity, gender, diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of innovation. You're going to miss out on all of that. And so by opening up to non-traditional backgrounds, what you start to find is complementary skill sets that lend themselves well to the role. Another thing that we've had a lot of success doing is partnering with community organizations that have upskilling programs. And so these are, organizations within the community that are looking to go out to members of the community and help them advance their economic status through employment. So whether these are folks who are underemployed or folks looking to make a pivot in their career, we work with these organizations to build out programs where they can provide training and upskilling for these individuals to prepare them for roles within our organization. Conversely, we also do that internally. So we look at opportunities where we can establish programs for our employees to upskill them and give them cross-functional skill sets that give them the opportunity to think about their career not as a ladder, but as a lattice. So they can move cross-functionally within the organization, so they can look at different opportunities and be qualified, for those opportunities. So I think those are some of the things that have proven really successful for us in driving diversity into the pipelines. And again, it's diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, but diversity of thought, diversity in innovation, diversity in background. It just lends itself to that innovation that you're going to want to find within your organization.
Yeah, and I can tag in really quick on that as well. Arya, that's a great point. When you think about also looking at finding folks based on skills, former recruiter here. So then, you can get caught up in that. I'm looking for this profile, right? I'm looking for this exact background. When you start looking at the skills that could transfer, you find a whole different talent pool that doesn't add in bias, right? You're looking at particular things that someone can do and do well. And then if you target those communities where you know that those folks may have those skills, for instance, looking at what we do in customer success inside of Eightfold, we find that folks do really well in our organization that have a consulting background, but not just a consulting background, a teaching background. So folks that have gone from teaching to consulting to customer success, we find a lot of parallels there. Same thing in recruiting background, right? Eightfold is a TA software, a HR people managed software. So being able to bring people who have been in those shoes, looking at the skill sets rather than looking at a set profile, you do get that diversity of thought, background, and ability to lean in different ways than if you were just looking for the same profile every time.
So as a former talent acquisition person, I can't help myself. So I have to say also a couple of things here. And one is to say, in addition to the community organizations that Arya mentioned, there are professional organizations and affinity groups that are key in making sure that we are accessing talent as well, right? For us in financial services, National Black MBA, NABA, Alpha, all these organizations that are either Black or African American affinity networks or groups, Latinx groups, women groups, et cetera. And that's a great way of looking at talent at this more senior levels. You have organizations like ELC or NASP. And, because when it comes to underrepresented demographics and people, it's about trust and relationships, right? And those sometimes take a long time to ferment and a long time to develop. And so you have to show up authentically. You have to develop these relationships. You have to get on the ground. There is probably no better time or no more popular time than recruit at HBCUs and HSIs, right? Because now they're getting a lot of attention, a lot of resources finally, and you're starting to see that the talent that's coming from those institutions are great talent. But similarly, when we go to our what we call traditional schools, we need to look deeper, right? We can't just go to a general career fair and expect that people of underrepresented backgrounds will be there, because they're going to say, yeah, those are not for us, right? And they're not looking for me. They're looking for the other type of talent. So you have to be a little bit more agile in terms of how do you reach, to those clubs that are, within those campuses like NYU or Columbia or Boston University, but that you're going deeper into those populations, which oftentimes you find a lot of great diverse talent as well. And then the last thing I'll say is, a lot of organizations have gotten smarter around, how do they position themselves from a brand and marketing perspective to potential prospects. And one of the things that has helped a lot is, looking at our job descriptions. Are they really welcoming, and are they really really audited so that the language is inclusive, right? And there are a number of now software tools that allow you to look and put your job description through this system that tells you, you know what, you may want to change this word because it may not come across as being inclusive. It might actually is more, male oriented or more paternalistic, and you may want to take a look at that. So those are some of the things I think that are helping. And then just being intentional. You have to be intentional. You have to have a plan, right? So these populations are not just going to show up at your doorstep. You actually have to go a little bit deeper and making sure that the people who are doing the recruiting are representative of the diversity you want to see. That's another key that a lot of companies oversee and not pay attention to, which is to say who's showing up, right, to those campuses, who's showing up, who's developing those relationships, and are those folks reflective of the diversity we want to see.
Paul, I love that you touched on the sort of early career recruitment angle on this, because it is such a great opportunity to find diverse talent. I look at, we did a cohort of about 100 interns this year in Central Division at Comcast. We had over 80 schools represented within that 100-person cohort. And it was everything from Ivy Leagues to HBCUs and HSIs to community colleges. But it was such a diverse representation of individuals that we had in that group that really helps to drive that through the organization when you're intentional in driving conversion rates, from those type of programs. So I think it's such a key element, like you said, and, you touched on the folks doing the recruiting. I'll take it one step further and also say it's important you have diversity in the folks that are doing the interviewing. So looking at diverse interview panels, giving folks during the interview process access to your ERGs and to people that they can certainly see themselves in and people that they can find kinship with in your organization is going to give them an additional level of comfort. That people like them are finding success in your organization, that people like them are comfortable in your organization. And so that kinship during the interview process, whether it be with their interviewer or with others in the company that you're introducing them to, can really go a long way in making sure that you're getting their full engagement during that process.
And sir, you opened up a can of worms here. I just have one more comment and then you can move us along. But I think it's not only when you're thinking about all of that interviewing process that you put time and effort into, but it's also then what's visible on your site, right? If you aren't known as an organization that values diversity, folks are not even going to spend any time looking at you. That's so important for folks that are early careers, for any really part where you are in your career. That's something that I always look for in an organization. Do they publicize their ERGs? Do they have a statement about what does DEIB look like? Where can I find information on how they work to foster inclusivity and belonging? Those are things that folks will look at. And even if you've got the best recruiting team in the world that says all the right things, if they're not seeing it in your organization before they even think about applying, right? If they don't see it, they're not going to come forward, regardless of maybe it's a perfect role. But it's so important to find the right organization to hitch your wagon to before you even think about that process.
Sorry, Spencer, can I add my?
Mona, I was just getting ready to call on you.
We all got to be in on this one.
Yes, on this one. So as a scientist who studies the intersection of technology and society with a focus on AI and currently AI in recruiting, I just want to caution us against kind of taking for granted that any of the tools that help us accelerate recruiting are without bias. So I think that there is a responsibility that all of us have and especially those who are gatekeepers, to think critically about technology, understand how exactly a tool works, what kind of assumptions are actually operationalized in this tool. For example, if we're using an automated personality assessment tool as part of our recruiting process, is this actually based on real science or pseudoscience? What is the history of personality testing and its relationship to hugely problematic ideologies, for example? What does the data set look like that we're working with here? Are there potentials for algorithmic amplification of societal bias in these tools that are becoming infrastructural to recruiting? So I think that that's something we need to think about, is this kind of socio-technical literacy that we have to develop as AI tools become part of deciding who gets a job.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mona. One of the things I've seen, particularly around AI work, is there is plenty of bias that happens with a lot of these tools. We see this with like facial recognition, for example, and not necessarily being able to read, say, maybe folks who have dark skin or something like that on their faces. And so it's important. It's definitely important to make sure that these tools are reflective and are just as diverse as you want to have for your the candidates that are looking to apply for these positions. And I'm curious, I wanted to follow up with you. In your line of work, what changes have you seen in regards to like kind of DI work, or have you seen like kind of a larger shift towards, moving in kind of the direction that the rest of the panelists are talking about, or, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you for that question. So I would say that we have, it ebbs and flows. We've seen over the past 5 to even 10 years, really mounting evidence of the social impact of algorithmic technologies. You've just mentioned some of this, Spencer. We can no longer ignore that these algorithmic impacts kind of squarely map onto intersectional inequalities in society. So the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, religion, what have you. A lot of this work has actually been produced by scholars or activists or community advocates who represent these kinds of communities. So I would just want to make sure we get across that the labor of uncovering bias often is done by those who are affected. And so we've seen that. We have seen and increasingly are seeing regulators respond to these issues. We've seen, for example, the AI bills of rights being proposed by the White House recently. We are looking at the EU AI Act that is gonna hit the 50 million people market of the European Union come spring. These kinds of regulations are asking for things such as algorithmic risk assessments, algorithmic audits, and we'll see kind of the impact of that next year, that will kick in next year. What we have to do as an interdisciplinary community in the academy and as interdisciplinary teams between industry, policy, and so on, is think about what that actually means on the ground, how we can not just comply and kind of, develop box ticking exercises, but really take that as a cue to really make DEI strategies infrastructural to the technologies that we use. So this is a great opportunity, a great moment in time to really make a mark. So this is just a call also for all kinds of collaborations that I think we should be embarking upon. I hope that answers your question.
No, that is. I'm curious of just in your research, have you seen some solutions? I know you mentioned next year you're going to be getting some more information, but currently from what you've been seeing, do you feel like there's things you can reach out to companies now about of what they could be doing better?
Yeah, one thing that is very popular and very important as a basic thing is transparency about when and where AI is actually being used. So there is a local bill here in New York City that is also gonna come into force in January next year that, for example, requires that candidates who are being evaluated with an AI system are being notified that they are evaluated with an AI system. So kind of this basic kind of transparency, what are you interacting with in the application process, is a very popular mechanism, and that is being worked towards. Another thing that we're doing here at the Center for Responsible AI is interdisciplinary audits. So we actually went and audited personality assessment tools that are out there on the market and assessed whether or not they are stable enough to actually reliably predict what they say they would predict. And we link that to understanding what basic assumptions we're actually working with here as a way to say, well, actually, this whole idea of this tool is problematic because it, for example, is has an ableist kind of understanding of the world, or it assumes that personality is stable enough that it actually can be reliably assessed across time, across different kinds of inputs, and all of these kinds of things. So these are some of the things that are really in the works. There's a lot more going on, and it's a growing community. And I just want to underline again that a lot of this work is driven by the DEI community. And unfortunately, the folks who are driving this in industry sometimes get fired from their jobs. We had the famous firing of Dr. Timnit Gebru from Google a year ago now, and just this week, the team around Reman Chaudhry at Twitter, who was looking at these things, was fired in its entirety. So again, it ebbs and flows, but there are concrete mechanisms that we already know about and work with.
I think it's a really good point in that, if you're indexing too far, especially in hiring decisions based on AI data or assessment data, what you tend to do, right, is push away from diversity because you're hiring the same thing over and over again, intentionally going to do that. And that can push you away from diversity in hiring and sort of create this mirror bias unintentionally that you're building into your hiring process. So while assessments can be great data points, they should be one data point to utilize, during an assessment process, and certainly not a decision maker by any stretch, because it can sort of drive you away from that diversity if you're looking to hire replicants of a candidate or an assessment result or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Paul, I have a question for you. What would you say is the biggest threat to DEI work?
Can I say Elon Musk? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I think there are many threats to the work. What I see as being one of the biggest ones is how polarized the work has become, because it's been politicized. And so therefore, a lot of the gains that you've seen over the last few years, especially after 2020, are now, being tried. There are efforts to slow those down. There are efforts, and there's some activist investors, if you will, that are going after companies who are, in their opinion, have too many woke policies, or that are now injuring other demographics, i.e. white males. And so I think that's going to slow down a lot of the work, and that's going to make companies a little bit jittery in terms of how they position themselves, what they say, what programming they put together, because they don't want to be in the sights, on the radar or of these folks. So I think that's a big threat. And I think that another big threat is the economy, right? If again, this conversation is about what do you do in a downturn, right? And so if when things are working well, and when people are feel like they can make ends meet, and when things of that nature, pocketbook issues, if you will, aren't as steep and acute, and I think that you'll see a lot more positivity around this work. But when things get tough, I think is human nature to begin to hoard, begin to slow things down, to not be as aggressive, and therefore I think that's a threat to this work really advancing. when people feel that opportunity is being taken away from them and given to somebody else, right? That's the sort of first thing that happens, right? Well, these folks are taking my jobs, or I'm not going to be able to have this opportunity because of these. And so you start to point fingers and blame. And I think that this work it's because of the nature of it, I think it's a target. And so those are some of the threats that I see in the horizon, among many others, but those are some of the ones that we need to think about.
Absolutely. Rebecca, I'm curious, just off yours of what Paul was saying, what would you say, or how would you say employee retention has played a role, particularly in an economic downturn?
Yeah, so it happens pretty frequently when folks get nervous about a downturn or a recession. They start shutting down particular departments, right? We see that a lot in talent acquisition. The first things to go are the TA team, right? Focuses start to shift away from those things that we do when things are good. And so, as we talked about already, that idea, if you're not doing the work when things are good, it's going to be really tough for people to believe you when you try to start doing the work when things get rough. That whole idea of stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews, you need to be focusing on DEIB, all of the pieces of that while things are going well. And then I think it was either Paul or Arya mentioned, like, you've got to double down when things are rough. And people need to know that you care about them, whether times are good or bad. And you need to make sure that folks feel like there's a place for them, regardless of what's happening in the economy. Now, I get it. Reductions in force and layoffs, they're a part of the cycle. But I think the way that we continue to do business now is really an old school model, because we aren't thinking strategically about who do we need to make sure stays in this organization? What departments could we redeploy? How do we upskill and reskill when times are rough, right? You think about talent acquisition folks, they know a lot about different parts of the business. When things are rough, could you reskill? Could you get them to be part of a different cross-functional project? Could you use them to augment a particular group? Maybe they don't know a ton about it, but how do you show folks that you invest in them regardless of good or bad? So I think our current model of, the ups and the downs and the layoff, rehire is an old school model that we need to look at differently, because we want our employees to feel included and a part of the conversation, regardless of what's happening in the marketplace.
Absolutely makes sense. Ari, so we have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask you this question. You mentioned kinship earlier when we were talking about kind of bringing people in particular. Comcast is something that you guys have been focusing on. What would you say, or how does an investment in development send a message to your employee base?
So I think it sends a few different messages, especially as we're sort of focused here on times of economic downturn. I think Rebecca hit on the value that an employee sees in knowing that they're valued. And so seeing that investment that we're making in their development, even in a time of economic downturn, just increases that retention opportunity for us in them knowing how much we value them knowing that we have plans for them beyond what they're currently doing. And that can go such a long way in just making an employee feel comfortable in their home with you. And, I think there's a lot of assumption a lot of times that during an economic downturn, we don't have to worry as much about employee retention, because where are they going to go? There's an economic downturn. There's not as many jobs available. So, we should be fine. And quite honestly, I think it's the exact opposite. If you're not locking those people down and making them feel stable within your organization and feel valued during that time of economic downturn, they've got less incentive to stay with you if another opportunity presents itself. And so, I think the other thing that it can show to employees in a time of challenging economic conditions, when you're still making investments in their development, it gives that perception and sends the message that there's still stability in the organization that they work for, that there's still the opportunity, and that company still has the ability to invest in their development that hasn't been lost. And it is a priority for the organization. And so when you send that message, there's also that sort of breath of fresh air from an employee of saying, hey, I can feel stable in where I am. I can feel stable in the organization where I'm calling my home right now. So I think those things can be really important just in sending those two different messages that really support the same result, which is retaining those top employees.
Well, yeah, and it shifts the message from it's all about the money to it's all about the people, right? If you treat your people well, your business will thrive. So if you're not doing the right things by people, regardless of what's happening in the industry, it's going to show up in a lot of different ways. So you've got to treat your people right first, regardless of the market, and then the business will follow.
And we should not forget that people are a lot more conscious around what their choices are nowadays, and they're literally voting and walking with their feet, right? Meaning that if they don't feel that they're being invested on, they will leave, even in an economic downturn, because they will go and become entrepreneurs, right? They will say, look, I want a work environment where I feel valued and I feel empowered, and if I'm not getting that here, then yes, it's just a paycheck, and do I stay for that paycheck, or do I now go and pursue my passion, right? And develop the next big product. And so I think that you're starting to see a lot more of that, where we are more conscious consumers of the workplace than we have ever been. And in the past, we just kind of sat there and hoped that, our name wasn't on some list. Whereas before, whereas now, I think people are being a lot more proactive around their future.
The hustle culture and the gig economy are real competitors. People are not just looking at what other job can I go to or what other company I can go to, but they're looking at, I can go on Instagram or TikTok and I can see people that are making millions of dollars through this hustle culture of, drop shipping Amazon products or real estate opportunities. There's just a million different things that they can do in today's economy that didn't exist even 10 or 12 years ago. And it's real competition.
Yeah.
And people aren't just voting with their feet, but if you don't want to work for that organization, you're also probably not going to buy products from that organization. So if you don't treat your people right inside, it not only says I'm done with that company as an employer, but I'm also going to tell all the folks around me that not only do I not want to work there, but I don't want to buy anything from there. And so your message gets thrown way further away than just, hey, I'm just going to leave this gig.
Absolutely. Well, we're just at time now, but I just wanted to thank you all so much for this panel. It's been excellent hearing from you all, Rebecca, Ari, Paul, Mona. Really appreciate all the insight and everything from about how AI and technology influences with bias and things comes in to some of the best practices for companies that are want to do more DI work, but are dealing with an economic downturn. Appreciate you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Spencer. We have one more minute. And I wanted to ask Mona a question, and not just because NYU Tandon is based in Brooklyn, as From Day One is, but you have a unique thing for an engineering school, which is that you have at least 50-50 gender parity. And I'm just wondering, how was that achieved in a fairly short period of time? It could be instructive to our crowd.
That is a question for our Dean Jelena Kovacevic, who has been kind of leading the charge. I think it is fair to say that this comes through and with support from the Tandon family, who's obviously supporting the Tandon School of Engineering, and scholarships for local diverse communities who come study at NYU. So I think putting money behind DEI initiatives is the most important thing. And then I think what is also fair to say is that we also have a very diverse faculty and administrators that are just also reflexive of the place we're in. We're in New York City and in Brooklyn, right? So I think that plays a huge role as well. And we keep our students, they're not just students, they're also research assistants on our projects. They're really actively involved in everything that we do. So I think that is probably what I would reply to that.
Well, thank you. That was a good picture of the school. It's a great story. So thank you all again. It sounds like, this week in particular, it was a good conversation to have, given all the tech layoffs at Meta Platform and elsewhere. And I think the lesson is that in a downturn, there can be opportunities found in taking the long view, as you all were saying. So thanks again. Hope to see you again soon.